He was the kind of drummer who didn't just keep time, he seemed to bend it. There was an electric, almost palpable pulse the moment he sat behind the drum kit. Something in the way his sticks rose and fell that drew everyone's eyes and ears to him. Even in a band led by a figure as towering as Dave Grohl, Taylor Hawkins stood out. He had that infectious grin, that boundless energy, and a style so exhilarating it could shake a stadium to its core. People older and younger, from all walks of life, found themselves connecting with his spirit. Maybe it was the way he reminded them of their own youthful days, days of loud music, big dreams, and unstoppable ambition. Or maybe it was something in those shimmering hi-hats and thunderous tom-fills that spoke to the common human heartbeat. He started life on February 17, 1972, in Fort Worth, Texas, though his family soon moved to California, where he truly came of age. Even as a youngster, there was a restlessness about him, a constant motion, as if the universe had wound him up a bit tighter than most, and set him free to roam among the palm-lined streets. A wild imagination and love for music took hold early. In his bedroom, he'd turn the stereo up until his parents gently knocked on the wall, requesting a little mercy. He'd pop on records from classic rock legends, then pound on whatever he could find, a pillow, a tabletop, an old practice pad, pretending he was in front of a roaring crowd. Music in the Hawkins household was more than background noise. It was the lifeblood of everyday life. His family might not have fully understood the intensity of his fascination, but they encouraged the spark all the same. As he ventured into his teenage years in Laguna Beach, Taylor discovered an entire subculture of musicians, equally enthralled by the raw power of rock and roll. Sea breezes and sunshine might have seemed an odd backdrop for the kind of grit and drive that turned a kid into a world-class drummer. But in that environment, he found open-minded friends and endless opportunities to jam. The local scene was dynamic, feeding on both emerging alternative music and older classic sounds. Taylor was just a kid, messing around on borrowed drum kits and occasionally sneaking backstage at shows, trying to soak up every ounce of atmosphere he could. There was a sense that something big was on the horizon, a future he was racing toward, fueled by the pounding in his chest that matched every drum beat he played. He idolized drummers like Roger Taylor from Queen and Stuart Copeland from The Police. Those influences would become cornerstones of his style, the flamboyance, the precision, the refusal to hold back. Music wasn't just about hitting the drums for Taylor, it was about channeling every ounce of energy, emotion, and spontaneity. When he closed his eyes and unleashed a rapid-fire fill, he wanted it to sound like fireworks. When he locked into a steady groove, his goal was to cradle the band's rhythm as steadily as a heartbeat. Fellow musicians noticed him early on. He had this combination of technical prowess and unbridled joy, a rare pairing that opened doors. By his early 20s, Taylor had begun gigging around town with local bands, playing wherever he could just to get the experience. Clubs, bars, and open mic nights became second homes. Late nights turned into early mornings, and more often than not, he found himself driving home with ringing ears and a racing mind, adrenaline still coursing long after the encore. In those days, he might have seemed invincible, fearless, ambitious, untamed. In truth, behind the bright smile and the confident presence, there was also an introspective side to him, a part that wondered if he was truly destined for greatness or merely living out a delusion shared by many young dreamers. Fate, however, seemed to have a grand design for Taylor. Through a friend, he caught a break playing in the backing band for the Canadian singer Sass Jordan, which was a step in the right direction. But the real turning point was his eventual spot in Alanis Morissette's touring ensemble during the height of her mid-90s fame. When Alanis burst onto the scene, her sound was everywhere, and Taylor found himself thrust into massive venues before worldwide audiences. The scale of it was dizzying. One moment he was a beach town kid pounding drums in scrappy clubs, and the next he was on huge stages, the glare of spotlights in his eyes, the roar of tens of thousands in his ears. That experience transformed him. It wasn't just about exposure, it was about professionalism, about learning how to give your all to the crowd, night after night, and about navigating the complex world that exists behind the scenes of any major tour. Alanis was gracious and supportive, allowing Taylor the space to shine. She valued not only technical mastery, but also emotional intensity, two qualities that he had in spades. During these formative months, he also began to refine his sense of self. Even as a side player, he discovered the potential to express his own personality through his drumming. Standing behind a megastar was no small feat, but he owned every single performance as if it were a piece of his own soul poured into those rhythms. Audiences responded. They saw a young man who was clearly having the time of his life, smiling so widely it was impossible not to catch some of that enthusiasm. Reviewers and industry insiders started talking about him, not just as the drummer in Alanis's band, but as someone with star power in his own right. It was around this same time that Dave Grohl, already a towering figure in rock music thanks to his history with Nirvana and his leadership of the newly formed Foo Fighters, took notice of Taylor. Foo Fighters had emerged as a band out of Dave's personal passion for songwriting and were rapidly gaining momentum. Dave was transitioning from a multi-instrumentalist who recorded most of the band's parts himself into a band leader who wanted true collaborators, people who would put their stamp on the music. The chance for Taylor to jump from Alanis's group to Foo Fighters felt like a natural evolution. It was also a leap of faith. Leaving a high-profile gig is never simple, but the chemistry between Dave and Taylor was almost instantaneous. They bonded over shared musical heroes, an irreverent sense of humor, and a mutual respect that transcended typical bandmate relationships. Joining the Foo Fighters might have been the highlight of Taylor's career up to that point, but it didn't come without pressure. Dave was not only a brilliant musician, but also a perfectionist. And after going through a few lineup changes, he wanted the right fit for the band's long-term future. For Taylor, stepping into that role wasn't just about technical finesse. It was about brotherhood, about locking eyes with Dave in the middle of a show and instantly knowing what needed to happen. That sort of understanding can't be manufactured. It's either there or it isn't. Luckily, it was there in abundance. Shows took on a vitality that can only be described as exhilarating. The synergy between Dave's guitar riffs and Taylor's thunderous rhythms made fans feel like they were witnessing a conversation in real time, one built on mutual respect and an inextinguishable passion for rock music. Their friendship became the stuff of legend. Offstage, they joked around like teenagers, pulling pranks on each other, making comedic online videos, and going out of their way to entertain fans. Taylor quickly became a favorite among audiences. He had a rebellious streak, but also a deeply caring side. Friends often described him as the heart of the band. He was the one who'd notice if someone felt left out or overwhelmed. He'd crack jokes, flash a disarming smile, and lighten the mood. But as often happens with charismatic figures, he sometimes masked deeper issues behind that comedic exterior. Taylor was sensitive, prone to second-guessing himself, and occasionally overwhelmed by the swirling chaos of touring life. He thrived on the stage, but when the stage lights dimmed, the lingering echoes of thousands of screaming fans could turn into a kind of emptiness. It was a tension that lived within him, the desire to perform, to dazzle, and also the sometimes painful need for solitude. A significant turning point came in the early 2000s when he faced a severe personal crisis that left him in a delicate state. For a brief time, he slipped into unconsciousness, an experience that sent shock waves through his family, his bandmates, and the community that adored him. When he emerged from that frightening ordeal, he carried a new perspective on life. In public, he maintained his trademark humor, saying he was thankful to have another shot. But behind the scenes, he wrestled with questions about purpose, about how to balance the demands of stardom with his own well-being. He spoke in interviews about feeling lucky to be alive, acknowledging that it had been a close call. This brush with his own mortality served as a catalyst for change, prompting him to re-examine his habits and his approach to the breakneck pace he'd been living at. It wasn't an easy road, but it was a testament to his strength that he came out of it more determined, more focused on the relationships that mattered, his family, his friends, and the music he loved. Taylor's recovery and subsequent return to the stage were triumphant. With Foo Fighters, he didn't merely return to playing drums. He became an even more explosive, heartfelt presence. He channeled the vulnerability he'd tasted into his performances. Audiences couldn't quite pinpoint why his drumming felt more alive, more urgent, but those who looked closely realized he was playing each show as if it could be his last. There was a renewed sense of gratitude that emanated from him, and fans drank it in as if they were starved for that kind of authenticity. The band continued to soar, pumping out albums that climbed charts and filled stadiums around the globe. Each Foo Fighters record was a snapshot in time of the group's evolution, and Taylor's role became increasingly central to their sound. When the group performed classics like Everlong, you could feel the unstoppable energy radiating from that drum throne, his long hair whipping around like a furious halo, a grin on his face that seemed to say, "Isn't this incredible?" Even as he enjoyed life in one of the biggest rock bands on the planet, Taylor's creativity flowed in other directions as well. He formed a side project called Taylor Hawkins and the Coattail Riders, a chance to step out from behind the drum kit and try his hand at singing and songwriting. It revealed a different layer of who he was, not just the explosive musician, but a thoughtful composer and vocalist with an ear for melody and a love of classic rock textures. The side project was received warmly by fans who appreciated getting to know a deeper aspect of his personality. He often spoke about how liberating it felt to channel the influences he'd carried with him since childhood, everything from Queen to Rush to the Police, without the weight of a massive mainstream spotlight. These side endeavors were a labor of love, a way to let the kid who once drummed along to records in his bedroom finally step forward and say, "Hey, this is me too." His comedic talents also shone through in various playful collaborations and live show antics. He was never too proud to poke fun at himself or to indulge in rock and roll campiness. If Dave asked him to swap roles and sing a classic Queen cover while Dave took over drumming duties, Taylor relished the chance. Audiences laughed, sang along, and marveled at how comfortable he seemed in any spotlight. Beneath that light-hearted surface, though, he took the role of entertainer very seriously. Like many deeply passionate people, he was his own worst critic, always analyzing recordings of shows afterward to see if he could have hit a fill tighter, locked into a groove deeper, or engaged with the crowd more effectively. All the while, the Foo Fighters juggernaut continued. Albums like There Is Nothing Left to Lose, One by One, Echoes, Silence, Patience and Grace, and Wasting Light cemented the group's status as stadium rock's torchbearers. They racked up awards, magazine covers, and primetime performances, yet managed to maintain a sense of groundedness that fans found refreshing. Taylor, in particular, became emblematic of that grounded spirit. He had a knack for being approachable, for chatting with fans as if they were old friends, for never letting the fame go to his head. Once, after a huge festival performance, a starstruck fan approached him, trembling with excitement, and instead of a hurried autograph or a quick selfie, Taylor offered a warm hug and asked how the person's day was going. Those moments, repeated countless times, built a lasting connection between him and the rock community. Still, no life is without its storms. The heavy toll of touring, the long separations from family, and the pressure to always keep up the momentum weighed on him. There were periods when the endless cycle of airport gates and tour buses left him exhausted both physically and emotionally. He dearly loved his wife, his children, and the quieter moments at home. Balancing that domestic tranquility with the relentless demands of a global rock enterprise was an ongoing challenge. When he was home, he wanted to be fully present, to coach a little league game or help with homework. When he was on the road, he needed the rush of the crowd to justify being away from the ones he loved most. The push and pull of these dual responsibilities could be exhausting, stirring up feelings of guilt and anxiety in those quiet, lonely moments after a show. Over time, he made efforts to carve out pockets of peace amid the chaos. He developed routines to keep himself centered. Simple breathing exercises, reading up on spirituality, going for long runs to clear his mind, or just sharing laughter with his fellow bandmates before stepping on stage. He understood the precarious balance of his lifestyle, recognized that each person is only human, no matter how massive the stages they stand on might be. He often confided in Dave about these anxieties, finding solace in their friendship that had deepened beyond any simple notion of bandmates. The two were more like brothers, each having survived earlier chapters of life that had tested their resilience. And they had come out the other side with more empathy and compassion for themselves and for each other. Taylor's continuing ability to function at such a high level while wrestling with private uncertainties was both inspiring and cautionary. Many who gravitated to his aura assumed that he was always upbeat, ever the life of the party. And while he did indeed love to entertain, few recognized the weight he sometimes carried once the cameras stopped rolling. Like countless people who excel at bringing joy to others, he often reserved his deepest struggles for private moments. Those close to him, especially his wife and bandmates, served as a vital support system. They lovingly nudged him to open up, to share the burden, to rest when necessary, and he did, though perhaps not as frequently as he should have. That's the tricky thing about a life lived in the glare of the public eye. The show goes on, no matter what personal storms might be raging within. Even as he managed these inner battles, he continued creating music that left fans breathless. Whether he was driving the beat on a rollicking Foo Fighters anthem or stepping up to the mic with his own group, he communicated an unfiltered, earnest passion. That sincerity bridged gaps across generations. For fans who had grown up in the 70s and 80s, he was a torchbearer of the classic rock spirit, someone who still believed in blistering guitar solos and pounding drum fills. For younger fans, he provided a bridge to the golden era of rock while also keeping things fresh and modern. The accessibility of his personality meant that people felt they knew him, even if they'd only seen him from a distance. He was a star, yes, but he seemed like the friendliest guy in the room, the one you'd want to sit with at the bar, talking about old Queen records until closing time. As the years went on, he indulged more of his passion projects. He formed a cover band called Chevy Metal, which gave him an outlet to play the music he'd adored as a kid, deep cuts from bands like Van Halen, Sabbath, and of course, Queen. Those shows were like parties with your closest friends. No pretense, no massive production, just raw, celebratory rock and roll. He took on new collaborations, never shying away from stepping out of his comfort zone. He was the sort of person who'd stay up all night learning a new set of songs just because he was excited about a chance to jam with other artists he respected. Though fans saw a vibrant, unstoppable force, those around him sensed a quiet awareness that time can be fleeting. He knew that each moment on stage was precious. In interviews, he'd reflect on the speed of it all, how quickly decades of music could flash by. He'd speak with gratitude about where life had taken him, how remarkable it was to share the stage with his heroes, to inspire a new generation of drummers, to stand side by side with Dave Grohl, forging a musical legacy that would stand among rock's greatest. But sometimes a fleeting look would cross his face, or a melancholy note would slip into his voice, and you got the sense that part of him worried it could all vanish in a heartbeat. And then, in a moment that caught the entire music world off guard, that heartbreak occurred. During a tour that had taken him far from home, he left us unexpectedly. The news rippled through the global community of fans and musicians like a shock wave. At first it seemed impossible. How could someone so full of life, so seemingly invincible behind that drum kit, be gone? Tributes poured in from every corner of the industry, from fellow drummers who looked up to him to the countless fans who cherished his warm smile and generous spirit. The outpouring of grief was also a celebration. Memories of fiery performances, hilarious backstage anecdotes, heartfelt interactions. Cities lit up their marquees in his honor. Radio stations played marathon blocks of Foo Fighters songs. Social media became a living memorial. And in the center of it, a family and a band were left grappling with an unimaginable loss. For Dave Grohl, the pain was evident in every word he managed to release in the days and weeks afterward. Band members and close friends seemed hollowed by the shock, as if the world had dimmed a shade because their bright light was no longer on stage with them. Taylor's wife and children, shrouded in the privacy they needed to grieve, received an outpouring of love and support from across the globe. People sent letters, artwork, and heartfelt messages, all in an effort to convey just how profoundly Taylor's life had touched theirs. Friends told stories about him that many had never heard, tales of generosity, kindness, and mischievous humor that painted an even richer portrait. Some recalled the time he stayed up all night talking them through heartbreak, or how he once visited a fan in the hospital, unannounced after hearing they couldn't attend a show. Others talked about his uncanny ability to remember small details about people's lives and how he used that knowledge to make them feel seen and appreciated. These stories weren't just about a famous drummer. They were about a man whose capacity to care was as boundless as his talent. Perhaps the most moving tributes came in the form of music. Many bands across the world dedicated performances to him, either by playing Foo Fighters songs or by leaving a quiet moment during their sets to honor his memory. Drummers of all skill levels recorded videos of themselves playing along to his famous grooves, adding heartfelt notes about how he had inspired them. What remained was a deeper appreciation for what he gave us, the sense that sometimes life's greatest gifts lie in the unfiltered moments, a roaring crowd, a sweaty bandmate by your side, a child at home waiting to greet you, a new riff that sparks your imagination. Taylor embraced it all, holding tight to the idea that if you're going to live, you might as well live fully. That spirit still resonates, humming in the background of every Foo Fighters track, in the memories of the fans lucky enough to see him perform, and in the hearts of everyone who draws inspiration from his life.